Gold Thread Studios. The Dragon They Overlooked. Season 1, Episode 1. The Return. Prologue. There are people who spend their entire lives moving toward a place they have never truly known. Not because they are lost. Not because they are running from something. But because somewhere inside them lives a quiet question that refuses to disappear. Where do I belong? For some, that question is answered by the street where they learned to ride a bicycle. For others, by the language their grandmother spoke while preparing dinner. For still others, the answer lies across an ocean. Ethan Liang had carried that question since childhood. He had grown up beneath California sunshine, surrounded by strip malls, suburban neighborhoods, baseball diamonds, and freeways that stretched farther than the eye could follow. His first language had been English. His first school had begun every morning with the Pledge of Allegiance. His favorite food as a teenager had been hamburgers. Yet every Lunar New Year, his parents transformed their small home into another world. Red lanterns appeared. The smell of ginger and soy filled the kitchen. Old photographs emerged from carefully protected boxes. Black and white pictures of villages his father rarely spoke about. Images of grandparents Ethan had never met. Streets that no longer looked the same. A country that felt strangely familiar despite existing only through stories. China. It had always existed like a second heartbeat beneath the first. Quiet. Patient. Waiting. Years passed. University. Graduate school. Late nights writing software no one believed could work. Business competitions. Investor meetings. More failures than successes. More coffee than sleep. Until one autumn afternoon. Everything changed. An email. 16 words. We would like to discuss bringing your platform to Beijing. Nothing more. Nothing less. He read those words 5 times before allowing himself to believe them. The opportunity wasn't simply professional. It was personal. His father stared at the email in silence before removing his glasses. You know, he finally said, I never imagined one of my children would go back. Not back. Forward. That distinction mattered. His parents had left China seeking opportunity. He was returning because opportunity had called him. History had folded itself into a circle. 3 months later. Flight CA-986 descended through soft clouds as dawn painted northern China in shades of silver. Ethan leaned toward the window. Below him, the city stretched endlessly. Ancient walls hidden among forests of steel and glass. Parks wrapped in early morning mist. High-speed rail lines slicing through neighborhoods where bicycles still waited outside apartment buildings. Nothing looked exactly as he had imagined. Everything somehow felt familiar. A strange contradiction settled inside him. He smiled without realizing it. Home. Or perhaps something that might one day become home. The wheels touched the runway with a gentle shudder. The cabin erupted into scattered applause. A tradition his American flights had long abandoned. Small things. Different things. Beautiful things. He watched airport workers moving across the tarmac with practiced precision. Every face looked vaguely familiar. Not because he recognized anyone. Because, for the first time in his life, he looked like almost everyone around him. It was comforting. For nearly 3 minutes. Until immigration. The officer examined his passport. Looked at Ethan. Then at the passport again. You're American? The question wasn't hostile. Only curious. Yes. The officer nodded. Stamped the passport. Welcome to China. Not. Welcome home. A tiny difference. Barely noticeable. Yet somehow, it lingered. Outside Beijing Capital International Airport, cool October air greeted him. The city smelled unlike anywhere he had ever lived. Rain on stone. Fresh steamed buns from a nearby vendor. Coffee drifting from a modern cafe. Autumn leaves. Diesel engines. History. Possibility. His taxi merged into wide expressways where futuristic skyscrapers rose beyond centuries-old rooftops. Every kilometer seemed to contain another version of China. An elderly man practiced Tai Chi in a neighborhood park. Young professionals hurried into gleaming office towers with takeaway lattes. A grandmother bargained for vegetables in a bustling market. Students laughed outside a university gate. Delivery scooters darted through traffic with impossible precision. The city refused to be defined by a single image. It was ancient. It was modern. It was patient. It was restless. It carried emperors and entrepreneurs within the same heartbeat. Ethan watched silently, listening, learning, wondering. Perhaps this city wasn't waiting for him to understand it. Perhaps it was waiting to see whether he was willing to understand it. And somewhere beyond the skyline, unseen by either of them, another young professional hurried toward a downtown law office, carrying a leather briefcase and a schedule already overflowing before sunrise. Her name was Lin Xiaoyu. Neither of them knew it yet. But before the leaves of autumn had fallen, their lives would become forever intertwined. And somewhere else, inside a gleaming office overlooking Beijing's central business district, a rising entrepreneur named Li Wei stood beside floor-to-ceiling windows, reviewing the presentation that would soon introduce him to an American partner he believed would help build his future. He smiled. He imagined a partnership. He imagined success. He had no idea that envy often arrives dressed as admiration, nor that the greatest mistake of his life would begin with a handshake. The story had already begun. None of them knew it yet. Only Beijing did. Because cities, like old storytellers, often recognize the ending long before the people living inside them. Thread lesson. Sometimes the longest journey isn't across an ocean. It's across the distance between who you have been and who you are about to become. Chapter 1. A city that never introduces itself. Morning arrived slowly over Beijing. Not because the sun hesitated, but because the city preferred introductions that unfolded one layer at a time. Long before the first rays reached the glass towers of the central business district, delivery trucks rolled through narrow alleyways where stone walls had witnessed 6 centuries of change. Street sweepers moved with quiet rhythm beneath rows of ginkgo trees whose golden leaves gathered along the sidewalks like scattered pages from an ancient book. Steam drifted from bamboo baskets stacked outside breakfast stalls. The aroma of fresh baozi mingled with roasted sweet potatoes and strong coffee. Business executives in tailored suits crossed paths with elderly couples carrying reusable shopping bags. University students hurried toward subway entrances while retirees gathered beneath crimson pavilions to practice Tai Chi in movements so graceful they seemed to slow time itself. Beijing never forced its history upon anyone. It simply carried it. Every avenue held another century. Every neighborhood another story. Every face another ambition. As Ethan Liang watched the city from the back seat of his taxi, he realized something unexpected. This wasn't the China from old family photographs. Nor was it the futuristic version he had seen in documentaries. It was both. Construction cranes reached toward the clouds while temple roofs rested quietly beneath them. Electric vehicles glided past bicycle couriers. Luxury boutiques stood only blocks away from family-owned noodle shops that had served the same recipes for generations. Nothing competed. Everything coexisted. The city felt less like a place and more like a conversation between yesterday and tomorrow. His driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. First time in Beijing? Ethan smiled. First time living here. The driver nodded knowingly. You'll love it. A brief pause. Or you'll spend 6 months trying to understand it. He laughed. Which one happened to you? The driver laughed even harder. I've lived here 48 years. Another pause. I'm still trying. They both smiled. Sometimes wisdom arrived disguised as humor. The taxi exited the airport expressway and entered the heart of the city. Traffic thickened. Glass skyscrapers reflected the pale morning sky. Digital billboards displayed advertisements in brilliant colors. Cyclists flowed through dedicated lanes with astonishing precision, moving like schools of fish that somehow never collided. Every traffic light seemed perfectly choreographed. Every intersection possessed its own rhythm. Chaos. Organized chaos. California had taught Ethan to drive. Beijing appeared to have taught people something entirely different. Adaptability. His apartment stood inside a newly completed residential tower overlooking Liang River. The building blended understated luxury with modern Chinese design. Natural stone. Warm wood. Quiet elegance. The lobby smelled faintly of cedar and jasmine tea. A concierge greeted him with a polite nod before handing him a small welcome package from the property manager. Inside, transit cards, emergency numbers, a neighborhood guide, recommendations for restaurants, and a handwritten note. Welcome to Beijing. We hope this city becomes part of your story. He read it twice. A simple gesture, yet somehow more personal than the immigration officer's formal greeting. The apartment itself surprised him. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked an endless skyline stretching toward distant mountains barely visible through the autumn haze. To the east, the first sunlight illuminated hundreds of towers. To the west, older neighborhoods still clung to winding streets where rooftops carried echoes of another era. His furniture had already arrived from California. Books lined the shelves. Family photographs rested on the desk. A framed picture showed his parents standing outside a modest restaurant in San Jose on the day they became American citizens. His mother held a tiny American flag. His father held Ethan, barely 3 years old, smiling without understanding why everyone else looked emotional. He placed the photograph beside the window. 2 countries. 1 family. Neither erased the other. His phone buzzed. A message. Li Wei. Welcome to Beijing, Ethan. Hope your flight went well. Rest today. Tomorrow we begin building something extraordinary. Simple. Professional. Optimistic. Ethan smiled. He typed back. Looking forward to it. Thank you for the warm welcome. He pressed send. Neither man knew those ordinary messages would one day be examined by lawyers, investigators, and journalists searching for the first thread in a story of trust and betrayal. At that moment, it was simply 2 entrepreneurs preparing to chase the same dream. Across the city, Li Wei stood in the conference room of Horizon Dynamics. His reflection stretched across the polished glass table as assistants arranged presentation folders for tomorrow's meeting. He adjusted his tie. Confident. Disciplined. Respected. At 36, he had already built a reputation as one of Beijing's most promising young entrepreneurs. Investors admired him. Employees respected him. Competitors watched him carefully. Yet hidden beneath every achievement was a quiet fear he had never admitted aloud. He was excellent at building companies, but he had never been the one with the original idea. He improved. He optimized. He negotiated. Others imagined. He executed. Until now, he believed that was enough. Tomorrow would test that belief. Far away, in a sunlit office lined with shelves of legal volumes, Lin Xiaoyu finished reviewing a stack of merger documents. She removed her glasses and looked out toward the skyline. Another acquisition. Another dispute. Another day helping ambitious people protect things they believed belonged to them. She had spent nearly a decade navigating contracts, intellectual property, and corporate conflict. She knew one truth better than most. Businesses rarely collapsed because of competition. They collapsed because someone stopped telling the truth. She closed the final folder. Outside, the city continued its endless conversation between tradition and tomorrow. Somewhere within that conversation, 3 lives had begun drifting toward one another. Not with the violence of a storm, but with the quiet certainty of rivers that, after countless winding miles, are destined to meet. Thread lesson. A city reveals itself slowly. So do people. The first impressions we trust the most are often the ones that hide the deepest truths. Gold Thread Studios. The Dragon They Overlooked. Season 1, Episode 1. Chapter 2. The Weight of Two Names. There is a curious moment that belongs only to those who have lived between cultures. It arrives without warning. Sometimes in an airport. Sometimes around a dinner table. Sometimes when a stranger asks a question so ordinary that it seems harmless. Where are you from? Most people answer without thinking. A city. A state. A country. But for others, the question is never that simple. Ethan Liang had answered it differently his entire life. In elementary school, he answered, San Jose. His classmates replied, No, where are you really from? In college, he answered, California. Some smiled politely before asking, No, I mean originally. When visiting relatives in Hong Kong years earlier, another question replaced the first. You grew up in America? And somehow, that answer also made him different. Too Chinese for some. Too American for others. He had spent 32 years standing comfortably between two worlds. Until now. Now he intended to build a bridge between them. His first morning in Beijing began before sunrise. Jet lag had quietly stolen the last few hours of sleep. Instead of fighting it, Ethan dressed and stepped outside. The October air carried a gentle chill. The sidewalks were already alive. Office workers queued patiently outside breakfast shops. Parents walked children toward school, tiny backpacks bouncing with each step. A flower vendor carefully arranged chrysanthemums outside her storefront. Nearby, an elderly man fed sparrows from the palm of his hand. The birds landed without fear, as though they had known him for years. Ethan wandered without destination. Some cities demanded itineraries. Beijing rewarded curiosity. He crossed a small stone bridge spanning the Liang River. The water reflected apartment towers rising into pale blue skies, while willow branches danced softly along the banks. Joggers passed him. Cyclists rang polite bells before overtaking pedestrians. Someone practiced a bamboo flute beneath a quiet pavilion. The melody floated across the water with effortless grace. He stopped walking. Not because there was anything extraordinary to see. Because ordinary life, when fully observed, often became extraordinary. Eventually, hunger found him. A modest breakfast shop stood on a side street where only locals seemed to gather. He hesitated. The menu hung entirely in Chinese characters. He smiled. This is why I'm here. Inside, a middle-aged woman greeted him warmly. What would you like? Her Mandarin carried the unmistakable rhythm of Beijing. Ethan answered confidently. A bowl of doujiang and 2 youtiao, please. Her smile widened. You're not from Beijing. No. Shanghai? He laughed. California. She blinked. For a heartbeat, surprise crossed her face. Then amusement. I never would have guessed. She handed him his breakfast. You sound almost local. Almost. Such a small word. Yet it carried enormous distance. He thanked her and found a seat near the window. Outside, life continued without pause. Delivery drivers. Students. Construction workers. Young professionals glued to their phones. An elderly couple sharing breakfast in complete silence after what was surely decades of marriage. Different lives. Different dreams. One city holding them all. His phone vibrated. A video call. Mom. He smiled before answering. His mother's face appeared instantly. Behind her, familiar California sunlight poured through the kitchen window. You look tired. I landed yesterday. You still look tired. He laughed. I appreciate the sympathy. She studied him carefully. You've been walking. How do you know? You always walk when you're thinking. She had known him for 32 years. Some habits could never be hidden from mothers. So, she asked gently, how does it feel? Ethan looked out the cafe window. I don't know yet. His mother nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. That's probably the right answer. After they spoke, he remained seated for several minutes. His mother's words lingered. She had never pressured him to choose one identity over another. Neither had his father. At home, Chinese traditions had been preserved. Outside, America had shaped who he became. His parents had never viewed those truths as contradictions, only additions. Perhaps belonging had never required choosing one side. Perhaps it required carrying both with dignity. Across Beijing, Li Wei entered Horizon Dynamics precisely at 8:30. Employees greeted him respectfully. He knew every department, every manager, every investor by name. Control had become his greatest strength. He disliked surprises. He trusted preparation. His assistant approached with a tablet. The conference room is ready. The presentation? Finished. Our American guest? Arrives tomorrow morning at 9. Li Wei nodded. Excellent. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Or so he believed. Meanwhile, Lin Xiaoyu stood before a courtroom window watching leaves drift across the courthouse courtyard. A junior associate approached. Another intellectual property dispute. She accepted the folder. Without opening it, she sighed softly. Ideas. Always ideas. The world spent so much time fighting over ownership that it often forgot to celebrate creation. She opened the file. Read the names. Closed it again. Another company. Another accusation. Another reminder that innovation and envy had always traveled together. She had no way of knowing that before long. One case would arrive unlike any she had handled before. One that would quietly change her own life as much as her clients. As evening settled over Beijing, thousands of office windows illuminated one after another until the skyline resembled a constellation brought down to earth. From his apartment balcony, Ethan watched the lights emerge. Each one represented a family, a dream, a late-night deadline, a difficult conversation, a celebration, a disappointment. Millions of lives unfolding simultaneously. Somewhere among those millions, his own story had just begun. Tomorrow he would shake hands with Li Wei. Tomorrow the partnership would begin. Tomorrow would feel like the first page of an extraordinary future. And perhaps it was. The tragedy was simply that neither success nor betrayal ever announces itself on the day it first arrives. It usually enters quietly, smiling, offering its hand. Thread lesson. Trust is never built in a single conversation. Neither is betrayal. Both begin with small moments that seem too ordinary to remember, until one day they become impossible to forget. Chapter 3. The First Handshake. Morning rain arrived just before sunrise. Not the dramatic kind that rattled windows or flooded streets. This was Beijing's quieter rain. A fine silver curtain that softened the skyline and polished the city until every rooftop reflected the pale light of dawn. From the 32nd floor of his apartment, Ethan watched tiny umbrellas bloom across the sidewalks below. Black, gray, navy blue. Hundreds of them drifting between office towers like flowers opening after a long night. He smiled. Rain had always made cities feel honest. People stopped pretending they weren't in a hurry. Buildings lost their sharp edges. Everything slowed just enough for the truth to become visible. Today, he hoped, was the first day of the rest of his life. He dressed carefully. A charcoal suit, white shirt, deep blue tie, simple silver watch his father had given him after graduate school. No expensive jewelry. No unnecessary display. His father had always believed that confidence should arrive before wealth announced itself. As Ethan fastened the watch, he remembered the words spoken the night before he boarded the plane. His father had rested a weathered hand on his shoulder. Business is easy. Ethan had laughed. No, it isn't. His father smiled. No, he corrected. People are difficult. The business only reflects them. At the time, Ethan thought it was simply another lesson from a man who had spent decades running a small family restaurant. Years later, he would realize it was one of the wisest things he had ever heard. The headquarters of Horizon Dynamics rose from Beijing's central business district like a sheet of glass reaching toward the clouds. Elegant, modern, confident. The lobby was alive with quiet efficiency. Digital displays welcomed international visitors. Employees moved quickly but never appeared rushed. Fresh lilies decorated the reception desk. A pianist played softly in one corner, filling the vast marble space with gentle notes that somehow made the building feel less corporate. A receptionist greeted him in fluent English before seamlessly switching to Mandarin. Mr. Liang. Welcome. Mr. Li is expecting you. She led him toward a private elevator. The doors closed with barely a whisper. 38 floors disappeared beneath his feet. Li Wei stood alone inside the conference room. The city stretched behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. He watched Ethan enter. For the briefest moment, neither man spoke. Both were studying the other. Li Wei noticed someone younger than he expected. Calm. Observant. Not the loud, overconfident entrepreneur he had imagined. Ethan noticed someone composed. Sharp. Professional. A man who seemed completely at ease carrying responsibility. Li Wei smiled first. Ethan. It's good to finally meet you. Ethan extended his hand. So good to meet you in person. Their handshake lasted only a few seconds. Firm, confident, respectful. Nothing about it hinted that history would one day remember that moment differently than either of them did. The morning passed quickly. Presentations, financial projections, market analysis, product demonstrations. Ethan explained the software architecture with quiet enthusiasm. He rarely used complicated language when simple language would do. The truly brilliant seldom needed to sound brilliant. Li Wei noticed. So did everyone else in the room. Questions came rapidly. Investors challenged assumptions. Engineers debated implementation. Marketing executives discussed international expansion. Each answer Ethan offered revealed another layer of preparation. He hadn't merely invented an idea. He had imagined its future. By lunchtime, the atmosphere had changed. Excitement replaced caution. Possibility replaced skepticism. The room could feel momentum gathering. During lunch, the formal meeting dissolved into conversation. Li Wei poured tea. Real Longjing. Harvested earlier that spring. My grandfather believed every important business conversation should begin with tea. Ethan accepted the cup carefully. My grandfather believed every important conversation should begin with food. Li Wei laughed. Wise man. He owned a restaurant. Even wiser. The laughter came naturally. Nothing forced. Nothing strategic. For a little while, they weren't negotiating. They were simply two men discovering unexpected similarities. Their grandfathers had both lived through extraordinary change. Their parents had sacrificed comfort for opportunity. Both believed hard work mattered more than luck. Different journeys. Similar values. Trust began forming quietly, as it usually does. That afternoon, Ethan presented one final document. A notebook. Nothing expensive. The black leather edges had begun to wear from years of use. Inside, sketches, algorithms, ideas. Hundreds of pages filled with thoughts written during airport layovers, sleepless nights, coffee shop conversations, and early morning inspiration. Li Wei flipped through several pages. His eyebrows lifted. "You keep everything?" Ethan nodded. "If I don't write ideas down, I'll lose them." Li Wei smiled politely. Inside, something stirred. Admiration. Certainly. Respect. Without question. But there was another feeling. Small enough to ignore. Dangerous enough to remember. He realized something uncomfortable. The company they hoped to build had begun inside Ethan's imagination years before it ever reached a conference room. Li Wei had expected a partner. Instead, he had found a creator. Late that afternoon, the meeting ended. Investors shook hands. Photographs were taken. Champagne remained unopened. Li Wei preferred celebrating after results, not before. As everyone prepared to leave, Ethan paused beside the conference room windows. The rain had stopped. Sunlight now poured between the skyscrapers. The city shimmered. "It really is beautiful," he said quietly. Li Wei joined him. "You've only seen one neighborhood. I'm looking forward to seeing the rest." "You will." Li Wei smiled. "I'll show you the Beijing tourists never find." Ethan appreciated the gesture. He believed it was generosity. Perhaps it was. Or perhaps it was the beginning of something far more complicated. Because every meaningful relationship begins with two stories. The one people tell each other. And the one they keep hidden inside themselves. Only time decides which story proves stronger. Across the city, Lin Xiaoyu stepped from a courthouse carrying a stack of legal files. A cold breeze scattered golden ginkgo leaves across the stone steps. One leaf landed inside her folder. She picked it up, smiled, and tucked it between two pages instead of throwing it away. Some moments deserve to be preserved, even ordinary ones. She had no idea that, within weeks, one of those ordinary moments would introduce her to a man whose life was about to change forever. Nor could she know that the first page of their story had already been written. In a conference room she had never entered. Thread lesson. The strongest partnerships are not built because two people have the same talents. They endure because each respects what the other brings. The moment admiration quietly becomes comparison, the first crack has already appeared. Chapter 4. The Language of Ambition. There are moments in every great city when the morning belongs to dreamers. 6 o'clock. Before the meetings. Before the traffic. Before inboxes fill with impossible requests. Before ambition puts on its expensive suit. For one quiet hour. The city belongs to people who are still becoming who they hope to be. Beijing wore that hour beautifully. The first trains slipped silently beneath the streets, while bicycles traced familiar paths along tree-lined avenues. Vendors unfolded awnings with practiced movements. The scent of freshly steamed buns drifted into neighborhoods where lights flickered on one apartment at a time. Above it all, the skyline glowed amber beneath the rising sun. From his apartment window, Ethan watched the city wake. He wasn't thinking about investors, or contracts, or market share. He was thinking about possibility. The kind that exists before anyone tells you what cannot be done. His laptop rested on the dining table, already open. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. Flowcharts. user experience sketches, security models, ideas connected by arrows and handwritten notes. To anyone else, it looked like work. To Ethan, it looked like a conversation. Every problem asked a question. Every solution answered with another question. Innovation had never felt like lightning striking from nowhere. It felt like listening carefully enough to hear connections that everyone else had walked past. He typed another note into the margin. Technology should reduce distance between people, not create it. He stopped. Read the sentence again. Then smiled. That wasn't just a design philosophy. It was a life philosophy. Across the city, Li Wei's morning looked very different. His office overlooked the third ring road, where streams of traffic flowed with mechanical precision. He stood beside the espresso machine while reading the previous day's meeting notes. Every executive had left impressed. Every investor had responded positively. Every projection suggested success. He should have been satisfied. Instead, his eyes returned to one sentence written by his assistant. The investors were particularly enthusiastic about Ethan's long-term vision. He read it again and again. Not because it was inaccurate, because it bothered him. He closed the tablet a little harder than necessary. His assistant looked up. Everything all right? Li Wei forced a smile. Perfect. It was the first dishonest word he had spoken all week. Envy rarely announces itself. It does not arrive shouting. It doesn't slam doors or raise its voice. Instead, it whispers. Why him? Why not you? You worked just as hard. You deserve the recognition. The whispers are easy to ignore at first, until one day they begin sounding like your own thoughts. That afternoon, Horizon Dynamics hosted a strategy session. The room was smaller than the previous day's conference. Only senior leadership remained. Without the investors, conversations became more candid. An engineer presented a technical challenge involving scalability across multiple international markets. Silence settled over the table. Several solutions were suggested. None fully solved the issue. Ethan quietly reached for the whiteboard. Would you mind? Li Wei nodded. For the next 20 minutes, Ethan drew a new architecture from scratch. Not flashy. Not theatrical. Methodical. He explained every decision. Every trade-off. Every potential weakness. By the time he finished, the room had become unusually quiet. Not because people were confused. Because they understood. One engineer leaned back in his chair. I've been trying to solve that problem for 3 months. Another smiled. I wish we'd asked you sooner. Someone laughed softly. The tension dissolved. Li Wei joined the applause. His hands came together with everyone else's. His smile looked genuine. And perhaps, in that moment, part of it truly was. Because admiration and envy often occupy the same room before one quietly asks the other to leave. When the meeting ended, employees gathered around Ethan with questions. How had he approached the algorithm? Where had the idea come from? Could he review another project? Would he mentor the engineering team? He answered each question patiently, never making anyone feel rushed. Never speaking as though he were the smartest person in the room. That quality impressed people more than his intelligence. The truly confident rarely need to remind others of it. Li Wei watched from across the room, noticing something he hadn't expected. People weren't simply respecting Ethan. They were beginning to trust him. Trust. That invisible currency every leader hopes to earn. And one of the few things that cannot be demanded. Late that evening, Ethan decided to walk home instead of taking a car. The air carried the crisp fragrance of autumn leaves. Neon signs reflected across damp sidewalks from the previous night's rain. Young couples laughed outside cafes. Street musicians performed beneath pedestrian bridges. Office workers loosened ties as they shared late dinners before heading home. He passed a small bookstore tucked between a tea shop and a bakery. Without thinking, he stepped inside. The shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. History, literature, philosophy, business, poetry. Near the back, an elderly bookseller looked up from a novel. "You like to read?" Ethan smiled. "I like to learn." The old man nodded. "There is a difference." He walked slowly toward a display of classic Chinese philosophy. Removing a worn copy from the shelf, he handed it to Ethan. "You build businesses." It wasn't a question. Ethan looked surprised. "How did you know?" The bookseller chuckled. "Your eyes. They're looking at every shelf the same way an architect studies empty land." He tapped the cover of the book. "Read this. It reminds us that the strongest bamboo survives storms because it bends." Ethan accepted the book. "Thank you." "No." The old man smiled warmly. "Thank your future self." As Ethan stepped back into the cool Beijing evening, he had no way of knowing that the simple gift tucked beneath his arm would become something he returned to again and again in the months ahead. Some lessons arrive from mentors, some from parents, some from failure, and some from strangers whose names we never learn. High above the city, Li Wei remained alone in his office. Everyone else had gone home. The lights of Beijing stretched endlessly beyond the glass. He opened the notebook where he kept private thoughts. He wrote only one sentence. "Brilliant people inspire everyone until they begin making you feel invisible." He stared at the words for a long time, then closed the notebook. Outside, the city continued shining without choosing favorites. Inside, a single seed had been planted. Not hatred. Not yet. Something quieter. Something far more dangerous. Comparison. And comparison, left unchecked, has a way of convincing good people to make terrible decisions. Thread lesson. The moment another person's success begins to diminish your own joy, the battle is no longer with them. It is with the reflection waiting in the mirror. Dinner at the round table. There are business deals that begin in boardrooms. There are partnerships that begin in laboratories. There are friendships that begin by accident. But in China, some of the most important decisions are made around a dining table. Not because contracts are signed there, because character reveals itself long before signatures do. A shared meal has a way of lowering defenses. People speak more honestly between courses than they ever do beneath fluorescent lights. Li Wei understood this well, which was why, 3 days after Ethan's arrival, he extended an invitation. Not to another meeting, to dinner. The restaurant overlooked the shimmering waters of Hohai Lake. As dusk settled across Beijing, hundreds of lanterns reflected gently against the surface, their warm glow rippling whenever a breeze disturbed the water. Ancient courtyard homes stood quietly beside contemporary cafes filled with young professionals finishing another long workday. Music drifted softly through open windows. The city seemed suspended between memory and tomorrow. Ethan paused outside before entering. He had seen photographs of places like this. None had prepared him for the feeling of standing there. History wasn't behind glass. It was alive. People laughed where emperor's officials had once walked. Children chased one another across stones polished smooth by centuries of footsteps. Life had simply continued. Li Wei stood as Ethan approached. "You found it." "I almost stopped to take pictures." Li Wei smiled. "That's how tourists think." "And locals?" "They stop after dinner." Both laughed. The ice between them seemed to melt a little more. Inside, a large round table waited beside a window overlooking the lake. No sharp corners. No head of the table. Just a circle. A reminder that conversation should travel freely. Dish after dish arrived in quiet succession. Peking duck. Steamed fish with ginger and scallions. Stir-fried seasonal vegetables. lotus root, braised eggplant, handmade dumplings, jasmine tea. The lazy Susan turned gently as each dish was shared. No one guarded their plate. Everyone reached for what they wished. To Ethan, it felt strangely familiar. His family had always eaten this way, passing food, insisting guests take more, arguing affectionately over who hadn't eaten enough. Thousands of miles from California, the rhythm remained the same. Halfway through dinner, Li Wei leaned back. So, what made you leave America? The question lingered. Ethan considered his answer carefully. I wasn't running from America. I was running toward something. Li Wei nodded. What? Ethan looked toward the lanterns dancing across the water. My parents sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities they never had. They crossed an ocean. They learned another language. They worked 7 days a week. He smiled softly. I wanted to know the place they left behind. A moment of silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Respectful. Li Wei studied him. You know, my father never understood why anyone would leave China. Ethan laughed quietly. My father never understood why anyone would come back. The two men laughed together. Different histories. Same family love. As dessert arrived, Li Wei asked another question. What do you want your company to become? Most entrepreneurs answered with numbers. Market valuation. Global expansion. Revenue. Ethan answered differently. I want someone 20 years from now to solve a problem using something we built, without ever knowing our names. Li Wei blinked. That's your dream. Ethan nodded. If the technology outlives us, we've done something worthwhile. Li Wei looked down at his teacup. It was an answer he hadn't expected, nor one he completely understood. Later, they walked along Hohai's narrow pathways. The evening had turned cool. Street musicians played traditional melodies beneath old willow trees. A young couple rented a small boat, drifting slowly beneath glowing lanterns. An elderly photographer adjusted an antique camera while waiting for customers. Everything felt unhurried. The city seemed to exhale after sunset. Li Wei stopped beside the lake. When I was a child, my grandfather used to bring me here. He told me something I've never forgotten. Ethan waited. He said, never envy another man's harvest. You don't know how many winters he survived. Ethan smiled. Your grandfather sounds wise. He was. Li Wei stared across the water. I wonder what he'd think of me now. The words escaped before he realized he'd spoken them aloud. Ethan looked at him. What do you mean? Li Wei smiled quickly. Nothing. Just remembering old conversations. The moment passed. But somewhere deep inside, a question had quietly taken root. Across the city, Lin Xiaoyu sat alone in her apartment. A stack of legal briefs covered the dining table. Beside them rested a ceramic mug of tea that had long since gone cold. She rubbed tired eyes before reopening another contract. Corporate law rewarded precision. One overlooked sentence could cost millions. One ambiguous clause could destroy years of work. She often wondered why brilliant people devoted so much energy to protecting ideas, yet so little energy to protecting trust. Her phone buzzed. A colleague. Late night again? She smiled. When isn't it? Neither woman realized that within months, trust itself would become the center of a case unlike anything either had imagined. As Ethan returned home that evening, he felt lighter than he had since arriving. The partnership felt genuine. The city felt welcoming. The future seemed wide open. He stood on his balcony overlooking the glowing skyline. Somewhere below, millions of people were ending ordinary days. Cooking dinner. Helping children with homework. Working night shifts. Falling in love. Recovering from heartbreak. Celebrating. Grieving. Every illuminated window held another story. He wondered which window his own story would one day become. He did not know that somewhere across the city, Li Wei stood at his own apartment window, thinking about a single sentence Ethan had spoken. "I want the technology to outlive us." The words echoed in the quiet apartment. Li Wei whispered them once. Then again. Not with admiration, but with comparison. Comparison had become contemplation. Contemplation was beginning to become temptation. The change was almost invisible, like the first crack beneath winter ice. Impossible to notice, until the day everything falls through. Thread lesson. The strongest friendships are tested long before betrayal ever appears. Sometimes the first warning isn't an argument. It's the moment one person begins measuring their worth against another's success. Chapter 6. The Woman Who Read Between the Lines. There are people whose lives intersect because of coincidence. There are others whose paths converge because of choice. And then there are the rare few who begin influencing one another long before they ever meet. They move through the same city, breathe the same autumn air, watch the same sunsets from different windows, completely unaware that their futures are already quietly stitching themselves together. Ethan Liang had never heard the name Lin Xiaoyu. Lin Xiaoyu had never heard the name Ethan Liang. Yet Beijing already knew both of them. Monday morning unfolded beneath a sky the color of polished jade. The rain had washed the city clean during the night. The leaves along Chang'an Avenue shimmered with tiny droplets, catching the early sunlight like scattered crystals. Office towers reflected blue skies that had seemed impossible only 24 hours earlier. The city looked renewed, as though it had decided to begin again. Horizon dynamics buzzed with unusual energy. Whiteboards filled with diagrams. Conference rooms occupied before sunrise. Coffee cups multiplying faster than anyone could wash them. Ideas moved through the building almost as quickly as people did. Ethan loved this atmosphere. Not because it was busy, because it was alive. Innovation always carried its own pulse. He wandered between engineering teams, asking more questions than he answered. What problem are we actually trying to solve? It became his favorite sentence. Whenever discussions grew complicated, he returned everyone to that single question. The effect was remarkable. Problems suddenly became clearer. Solutions became simpler. People left meetings smiling instead of exhausted. One junior engineer later admitted, "I've never had someone make difficult work feel this possible." Li Wei noticed everything. He noticed that employees lingered after meetings when Ethan spoke. He noticed that interns quoted Ethan's observations. He noticed investors requesting Ethan's opinion before final decisions. None of this should have bothered him. After all, the company's success depended on exactly this kind of collaboration. Yet human emotions rarely obey business logic. Recognition had quietly become a finite resource inside his mind. Every compliment Ethan received felt like one fewer compliment available for him. It wasn't true. But jealousy has never required truth to survive. Only comparison. Several kilometers away, Lin Xiaoyu entered the offices of Han and Zhao International Law. The lobby overlooked Beijing's financial district. Minimalist architecture. Clean lines. Natural stone. Everything designed to communicate quiet confidence. Her assistant caught up with her before she reached her office. "Good morning. You have 3 contract reviews, a merger consultation, 2 arbitration meetings, and a startup requesting legal guidance." Lin accepted the schedule without complaint. "The startup," the assistant continued. "They're still very small. Not much revenue. But their technology looks promising." Lin smiled. Sometimes promising companies become extraordinary. And sometimes extraordinary companies disappear. "We treat both the same." Her assistant nodded. That was why clients trusted her. She never confused size with significance. Her office overlooked Beijing's growing skyline. On one wall hung framed photographs. Not awards. Not degrees. Landscapes. Mountains. Rivers. Forests. Places where no contracts existed. Friends often asked why. Her answer never changed. They remind me that no matter how important today's case feels, the mountains won't notice. Perspective. It had become her quiet form of wealth. During lunch, Lin walked alone through a nearby public park. She preferred eating outside whenever work allowed. An elderly calligrapher practiced enormous Chinese characters on the pavement using only water and a long-handled brush. Children stopped to watch. Within minutes, the sunlight began drying the strokes until they slowly disappeared. Lin stood quietly for several moments. The old man smiled without looking up. Beautiful things don't have to last forever. She returned the smile. Then why create them? He dipped the brush into another bucket. Because creating changes the person holding the brush. She carried those words back to the office. Without realizing it, someone else across the city had built an entire life around the same philosophy. Late that afternoon, Ethan and Li Wei visited a venture capital firm. The presentation went flawlessly. Questions came quickly. Answers came naturally. One investor finally leaned forward. Mr. Liang, what gives your platform an advantage competitors cannot easily copy? The room became quiet. Ethan didn't open another slide. He simply answered, our advantage isn't the software. It's the way we think. You can copy code. You can reverse engineer products. But you cannot easily copy a culture built around curiosity. The investor smiled slowly. I like that answer. Li Wei smiled too. Everyone in the room assumed it was pride. Only Li Wei knew it wasn't entirely. That evening, the two men rode back together. Traffic crawled along the third ring road beneath thousands of glowing office windows. For several minutes neither spoke. Finally, Li Wei broke the silence. Have you ever been underestimated? Ethan looked out the window. More than once. What happened? I stopped trying to convince people. Li Wei frowned slightly. You didn't defend yourself? I built something they couldn't ignore. Silence returned. Outside, the city flowed around them. Inside, those words found somewhere permanent to settle. Across Beijing, Lin finally left her office well after dark. The streets had quieted. Autumn wind carried the fragrance of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor. She bought a small paper bag before beginning the walk home. As she crossed an intersection, she paused to let an ambulance pass. For only a brief second, a black sedan waited at the same traffic light. Inside sat Ethan and Li Wei. Neither noticed the woman standing only a few meters away. The light changed. The sedan disappeared into the night. Lin continued walking. 3 strangers. 1 intersection. No introductions. No exchanged words. Only a city quietly weaving their lives closer together. Years later, none of them would remember that ordinary traffic light. Yet stories are often shaped by moments too small to recognize while living through them. Back at his apartment, Ethan opened the book the elderly bookseller had given him. A pressed ginkgo leaf slipped from between its pages. He hadn't placed it there. Perhaps the bookseller had. Perhaps another reader years ago. He smiled and left it exactly where he found it. Some things didn't need explaining. Outside his window, Beijing shimmered beneath a blanket of stars barely visible through the city lights. Tomorrow promised another meeting, another opportunity, another ordinary day. And ordinary days, more than dramatic ones, are where destinies quietly change direction. Thread lesson. The people who change our lives rarely arrive with fanfare. Sometimes they are simply walking the same streets, while the future patiently waits for the right moment to introduce them. Chapter 7. The Prototype. Every remarkable invention begins the same way. Not with applause. Not with headlines. Not with billion-dollar valuations. It begins with a question that refuses to let someone sleep. The world often celebrates the finished product. Rarely does it notice the countless mornings when someone stared at a problem long enough to imagine a different answer. Innovation is a quiet craft. It asks for patience before recognition, sacrifice before reward, faith before proof. Ethan Liang understood this better than most, because he had lived inside unfinished ideas for years. 3 weeks had passed since his arrival in Beijing. The city was beginning to recognize him. The woman at the coffee shop no longer asked for his order. The security guard downstairs greeted him by name. The elderly bookseller smiled whenever Ethan wandered through the narrow aisles, usually leaving with more books than he had intended to buy. Even the morning joggers along the Liang River had become familiar faces. Something unexpected was happening. The city no longer felt borrowed. It was beginning to feel lived in. Belonging, he realized, wasn't a single moment. It accumulated quietly, one ordinary day at a time. Inside Horizon Dynamics, anticipation filled every department. Today would be the first internal demonstration of the platform. Months of planning, years of ideas, thousands of hours of development. Everything had led to this room. The engineers gathered around a large display. Marketing executives lined the back wall. Investors joined remotely from Singapore, Hong Kong, and San Francisco. No reporters. No cameras. Only the people who had built it. Ethan stood beside the screen. He looked surprisingly calm. Not because he lacked nerves. Because he had already imagined this moment hundreds of times. He began without slides, without dramatic music, without slogans. He simply asked a question. How much time do people waste every day because information refuses to speak the same language? The room grew quiet. He continued. A hospital uses one system. A supplier uses another. A shipping company uses a third. Each system works, but they don't understand one another. He paused. Our platform doesn't replace them. It allows them to finally have a conversation. He pressed a single key. The demonstration began. Information flowed across the screen. Separate databases synchronized almost instantly. Inventory updated. Shipping routes recalculated. Artificial intelligence predicted delays before they occurred. The interface remained elegantly simple. Complexity disappeared behind thoughtful design. No one interrupted. Not because questions had vanished. Because everyone was watching possibility unfold. When the demonstration ended, silence lingered for several seconds. Then applause filled the room. Not loud. Not theatrical. The kind of applause people give when they know they've just witnessed something important. An engineer turned toward Ethan. I've worked in software for 15 years. I've never seen anyone simplify something this complicated. Another added quietly. It feels. He searched for the right word. Human. Ethan smiled. Technology should never make people feel smaller. It should make difficult things feel possible. Several people wrote the sentence down. Li Wei noticed. Later that afternoon, congratulations echoed throughout the office. Investors called personally. New partnership requests arrived. Recruiters began contacting Horizon employees with unusually generous offers. Success had a scent. The market always seemed to recognize it before newspapers did. Li Wei stood alone in his office overlooking the city. His phone buzzed. Another investor. Li Wei, congratulations. You've assembled an incredible team. He thanked him. The investor continued. And Ethan, you were fortunate to find someone like him. The sentence landed harder than intended. Fortunate. Not brilliant. Not visionary. Fortunate. The call ended. Li Wei stared at his own reflection in the dark computer monitor. The room suddenly felt smaller. That evening, Horizon hosted a modest celebration. No champagne towers. No elaborate speeches. Just colleagues sharing dinner together after months of relentless work. Someone suggested karaoke. Half the engineering department disappeared immediately. Laughter echoed through the restaurant. For a few hours, everyone forgot deadlines, forgot competition, forgot quarterly forecasts. They simply became people again. Ethan found himself seated beside Mei Chen, one of the youngest software developers on the team. She hesitated before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Were you always this confident?" He laughed. "No." She looked surprised. "I still get nervous. Every presentation. Every meeting. Every time I build something new." "Really?" He nodded. "The goal isn't to eliminate fear. It's to stop letting fear make decisions." Mei smiled. "I needed to hear that." Across the room, Li Wei watched the conversation. He couldn't hear the words. He didn't need to. He saw another young employee leaving inspired. Another quiet victory. Another invisible thread pulling people toward Ethan. As the evening ended, Ethan walked home beneath rows of golden ginkgo trees. Autumn had reached its fullest expression. Leaves drifted through the cool night air like tiny lanterns released from invisible hands. He stopped on a small pedestrian bridge overlooking the Liang River. The water reflected the skyline in shimmering fragments. A gentle breeze carried distant laughter from a riverside cafe. He rested both hands on the railing. His phone buzzed. A message from his father. "Proud of you. Remember, success attracts two kinds of people. Those who want to build with you, and those who wish they had built it first. Learn the difference early." Ethan smiled. His father had never met Li Wei, never visited Beijing, never stepped inside Horizon Dynamics. Yet somehow, the old restaurateur from California had spoken directly into the future. Ethan typed a simple reply. "Thanks, Dad. I'll remember." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Above him, the moon emerged between drifting clouds. Below him, the river continued its patient journey through the heart of Beijing. Rivers never hurried. They understood something people often forgot. The destination mattered. But so did every bend along the way. In another part of the city, Li Wei unlocked a drawer in his office that no one else ever opened. Inside rested a notebook. Not the company's notebook. His own. He opened to a blank page. For several moments, he simply stared. Then he wrote one sentence. "If one person can create greatness, can another person claim it?" He read the words. Closed the notebook. Locked the drawer. Outside his office, the cleaning staff quietly vacuumed empty hallways. Inside, a dangerous question had found its first permanent home. Thread lesson. Success doesn't only reveal what we've built. It reveals the hearts of the people standing beside us. Some celebrate your light. Others begin searching for a way to stand in front of it. Chapter 8. The Invisible Currency. There is a kind of wealth that never appears on a balance sheet. Banks cannot insure it. Governments cannot tax it. Markets cannot accurately price it. Yet entire companies rise or collapse because of it. It is called trust. Trust is the invisible currency exchanged every time a promise is kept. Every deadline honored. Every mistake admitted. Every success shared instead of claimed. Unlike money, trust grows slowly. And once broken, it rarely returns in its original form. November arrived quietly. The ginkgo trees that had painted Beijing in gold began surrendering their final leaves. Morning air carried a sharper edge. Scarves replaced light jackets. Steam rose from subway grates into the cold dawn while cafes filled earlier each morning with commuters chasing warmth before work. To Ethan, the city felt different now. Not because Beijing had changed. Because he had. The unfamiliar had become familiar. He no longer paused before ordering breakfast. He knew which subway exit shortened his walk by 5 minutes. He recognized the old violinist who played beneath the pedestrian bridge every Thursday evening. A city stopped feeling foreign the moment its routines became your own. Horizon Dynamics had become the talk of Beijing's technology community. Trade journals requested interviews. Universities invited Ethan and Li Wei to speak. Investors from Shenzhen, Singapore, and Tokyo began requesting meetings. Every week brought another opportunity, another possibility, another reason to believe they were building something extraordinary. One afternoon, an assistant entered Li Wei's office carrying a thick folder. The International Technology Conference. Li Wei looked up. What about it? They've selected the keynote speaker. He reached for the folder, already assuming it would be him. Instead, the invitation read, Keynote speaker, Ethan Liang. He stared at the page. Twice. Then a third time. The assistant waited. Would you like me to decline? Li Wei closed the folder slowly. No. His voice remained calm. Congratulate him. She nodded and left. The door closed. The silence that followed seemed louder than the city outside. Across the office, Ethan received the same news with genuine surprise. There must be some mistake. His assistant laughed. I checked twice. There isn't. He looked at the invitation again. A keynote. In Beijing. Only weeks after arriving. He thought of his parents. They had crossed the Pacific carrying 2 suitcases and uncertain futures. Now their son had been invited to speak before leaders from across Asia. Success rarely belonged to one generation alone. It echoed across families, across decades, across sacrifices children often discovered only after becoming adults themselves. That evening Ethan called home. His father answered from the restaurant's kitchen. The familiar sounds of sizzling woks and friendly conversations drifted through the phone. You sound busy. I always sound busy. His father laughed. So, how's Beijing? Ethan hesitated. I've been invited to give a keynote. Silence. Then, I'll close the restaurant early. Dad, you don't have to. I wasn't asking. Another pause. I've missed enough moments. I'm not missing this one. Ethan looked out across the Beijing skyline. For a brief second, California didn't feel nearly so far away. Meanwhile, Li Wei accepted an invitation to dinner from several investors. The restaurant overlooked the city from the top floor of a luxury hotel. Crystal chandeliers. Impeccable service. Quiet confidence. As dessert arrived, one investor raised a glass. To Horizon Dynamics. Everyone smiled. Another added. And to Ethan. What a remarkable visionary. The table nodded. Li Wei smiled politely. He even lifted his own glass. But something inside him tightened. The conversation continued. Ethan has such a refreshing leadership style. His presentation last week was exceptional. He explains difficult ideas so simply. Every compliment landed like another pebble in a pocket already growing heavy. No single stone was unbearable. Together, they became difficult to carry. Later that night, Li Wei walked home instead of calling a car. Cold air sharpened every breath. The city lights reflected across wet pavement after a brief evening shower. He passed a street artist painting portraits beneath a small umbrella. The artist looked up. Would you like one? Li Wei almost declined. Then changed his mind. 10 minutes later, the portrait was finished. It was technically excellent. Yet something bothered him. It doesn't look like me. The artist smiled kindly. It looks exactly like you. No. Li Wei frowned. It doesn't. The artist studied him for a moment, then quietly replied, Perhaps. It looks like the person everyone else sees. Li Wei said nothing. He paid, folded the portrait, and walked away. Those words followed him through the rest of the evening. The following morning, Ethan visited the elderly bookseller again. I finished the book. The old man smiled. And? I think I understood it. The bookseller chuckled. No. You understood the words. The book will spend the next 20 years teaching you what they mean. Ethan laughed. I suppose that's true. The old man reached beneath the counter and produced another volume. This one isn't about business. It's about character. I think you'll need both. Across the city, Lin Xiaoyu stood before a wall-sized screen reviewing a complex intellectual property dispute involving two rival technology firms. One company claimed the idea had been stolen. The other insisted it had been independently developed. Her junior associate asked, How do you tell who's telling the truth? Lin folded her arms thoughtfully. People think evidence tells the story. It doesn't. Patterns do. Lies are difficult to keep consistent. The truth usually doesn't need rehearsal. She had no idea that before long, those words would become the foundation of the most important case of her career. That afternoon, Horizon Dynamics gathered for another executive meeting. As everyone filed out, Ethan remained behind to organize scattered notes. Li Wei watched him quietly. You know. Ethan looked up. What? You trust people very easily. Ethan smiled. I try to. Li Wei walked toward the window. One day someone will disappoint you. Ethan considered the words. Probably. But I'd rather be disappointed a few times than spend my whole life assuming everyone deserves suspicion. Li Wei nodded. Neither man realized how profoundly different their worlds had just become. One believed trust was worth risking. The other had begun believing trust was something to manage. That difference would shape everything that followed. Thread lesson. Trust is the only investment that grows when it is shared. But the moment fear convinces us there isn't enough success for everyone, trust becomes the first thing we quietly spend. Chapter 9. A seat at the table. There is a difference between being invited into a room and being given a voice inside it. Many people spend their careers chasing the first. Few earn the second. Titles can open doors. Money can reserve a chair. Power can command attention. But respect is invited to speak before anyone else. And once respect enters a room, even silence begins listening. Winter announced itself one cold Monday morning. The last golden leaves had disappeared from Beijing streets. Bare branches reached toward a pale sky, while a sharp northern wind swept through the capital, carrying the first promise of snow. Steam curled upward from subway entrances. People walked faster. Coffee shops stayed crowded long after sunrise. Scarves covered smiling faces. The city had entered another season. So had Horizon Dynamics. The company had outgrown its first office. Construction had begun on an additional engineering floor. Recruiters struggled to hire talent quickly enough. Investors were calling before sunrise. Competitors had started paying attention. Success had arrived. Not all at once. One ordinary decision at a time. The executive board gathered for its monthly strategy meeting. Around the polished walnut table sat 12 people. Founders. Investors. Department heads. Outside advisors. The atmosphere carried a different weight than previous meetings. Today they would decide whether Horizon Dynamics would begin expanding beyond China. The room buzzed with possibility. Li Wei opened the meeting. Our projections have exceeded expectations. A series of charts illuminated the screen. Revenue, growth, hiring, market adoption. Every line climbed steadily upward. Several investors smiled. Months of careful work had begun bearing fruit. Then came the final agenda item: international expansion. The chairman looked toward Ethan. Mr. Liang, you've worked in both American and Chinese markets. We'd like your perspective. Ethan nodded. He stood, not with rehearsed confidence, with quiet preparation. He didn't begin with numbers. He began with people. If we enter another country believing we already understand it, we've already failed. Several executives exchanged curious glances. He continued. Technology travels. Trust doesn't. You earn trust city by city, customer by customer, conversation by conversation. He walked slowly toward the window overlooking Beijing. I grew up believing business was about products. I've learned something different. Business is about relationships. The product simply gives people a reason to begin one. Silence settled across the room. Not awkward silence. Reflective silence. The kind that follows something true. The chairman smiled. I've attended board meetings for 30 years. Very few people remember that. Another investor nodded. We should build slower, but stronger. One after another. Heads nodded around the table. The decision was unanimous. The expansion plan would continue, just not at the expense of trust. Ethan returned to his seat. He hadn't won an argument. He had changed the direction of the conversation. Li Wei watched every reaction, every approving glance, every compliment, every note taken while Ethan spoke. It wasn't merely admiration anymore. Influence had entered the room. Influence. The one thing Li Wei had spent years building. And now, without intending to, Ethan possessed it too. That afternoon, news spread quickly through the office. Employees discussed the meeting in hallways. Not because of the decision, because of the speech. A young product designer remarked, "He makes business sound human." An engineer smiled. I've never heard anyone explain strategy without making it feel like war. Another quietly added, I'd follow someone like that anywhere. The words were spoken casually, without malice, without politics. Li Wei happened to overhear them while walking past. He didn't interrupt. He simply kept walking. But every sentence followed him. Later that evening, Ethan accepted an invitation to speak with students at a university entrepreneurship club. The classroom held fewer than 50 people. No television cameras. No investors. Just young men and women carrying notebooks filled with impossible dreams. One student asked, "How do you know if an idea is good?" Ethan smiled. "You don't." The room laughed. He continued. "You know if the problem is real. If the problem is real, keep working. If the problem isn't, no amount of brilliant engineering will save the idea." Another hand rose. "Were you always successful?" This time Ethan laughed louder. "My first company failed. My second almost failed. My third taught me why the first two did." Failure didn't surprise the students. Hearing someone admit it did. After the session ended, a young woman approached. "My parents think I should become a banker. What do you think?" Ethan considered the question. "I think you should build a life you can still respect when no one is applauding." She wrote the sentence in her notebook. Years later, she would still remember it. Across town, Lin Xiaoyu spent the evening reviewing a startup's shareholder agreement. The founders were close friends. The contract assumed they always would be. She reached for her pen, crossed out one paragraph, added another. Her assistant looked confused. "They trust each other." Lin nodded. "I believe they do." "Then why change it?" She closed the folder gently. "Because contracts aren't written for the days people agree. They're written for the days they don't. Her assistant fell silent. Experience had taught lessons textbooks never could. Near midnight, snow finally began falling over Beijing. Soft, quiet, unhurried. From his apartment balcony, Ethan watched white flakes drift between the skyscrapers. The city looked transformed. Every rooftop, every bridge, every tree branch softened beneath a blanket of white. He held a mug of hot tea in both hands. Somewhere below, children laughed as they chased the season's first snowfall. He thought about California, about his parents, about horizon dynamics, about how fortunate he felt. His phone buzzed. A message from Li Wei. Good work today. The board was impressed. We're building something special. Ethan smiled and replied almost immediately. We're building it together. He meant every word. Across the city, Li Wei stared at the reply. His thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment. Then he locked the phone without answering. Not because he disagreed. Because somewhere inside him, a quieter voice had begun asking a dangerous question. If we're building it together, why does everyone remember his name first? Outside, snow continued falling over Beijing, covering streets, bridges, parks, roofs. Snow has a remarkable way of making every surface appear untouched. But beneath that flawless white blanket, the ground remains exactly as it was. So do the seeds buried beneath it. Some wait for spring. Others wait for darkness. Thread lesson. Recognition doesn't create character. It reveals the parts of us that success has been quietly waiting to uncover. Some hearts become generous. Others begin keeping score. Chapter 10. The Banquet of Promises. There is an old saying repeated in boardrooms across the world. Business is business. It sounds practical, efficient, emotionless. Yet history tells a different story. Empires have risen because two strangers trusted one another over a shared meal. Kingdoms have fallen because one promise was quietly broken. Behind every contract, there is always a human heart deciding whether a signature means something. By early December, Beijing had settled into winter. The city no longer smelled of autumn leaves. Now the air carried roasted chestnuts, charcoal from roadside grills, hot tea, and the faint sweetness of candied hawthorn sold by vendors beneath glowing streetlights. Snow lingered in the shaded corners of parks long after sidewalks had been cleared. The Liang River moved slowly beneath thin sheets of morning ice. Life had not become quieter, only sharper. People walked with purpose. The cold had a way of encouraging honesty. Horizon Dynamics had reached another milestone. A major international investment fund had agreed to lead the company's next round of financing. The announcement would remain confidential until contracts were signed. For now, only a handful of executives knew. Li Wei stood at the head of the conference room. This changes everything. Around the table, heads nodded. Expansion into Southeast Asia. New research teams. A larger headquarters. Recruitment from universities around the world. The future had arrived earlier than expected. The chairman smiled. We should celebrate. Li Wei agreed. A banquet. Tomorrow evening. The restaurant overlooked the frozen waters of Kunming Lake inside the summer palace grounds. Outside, ancient pavilions stood beneath a light blanket of snow. Inside, warm lanterns reflected across polished wood. The room had been reserved exclusively for Horizon Dynamics. Investors, engineers, department heads, founders. Everyone who had helped bring the company this far. No speeches had been planned. Only gratitude. As dishes arrived one after another, conversations flowed easily. An engineer described missing 3 consecutive family dinners during product testing. A designer laughed about accidentally sleeping in the office for 2 nights. An investor admitted he had nearly rejected the company during the first meeting. Everyone laughed. Success had softened old anxieties into good stories. Then the chairman rose unexpectedly. He lifted a small porcelain cup. I've watched companies for 40 years. I've seen brilliant technology fail, and ordinary ideas become extraordinary businesses. He looked slowly around the room. The difference has never been the software. It has always been the people. His eyes settled on Ethan. Mr. Liang, thank you for reminding us that innovation begins with humility. The room applauded. Ethan looked genuinely uncomfortable. He stood only long enough to bow his head slightly. This belongs to everyone here. No one builds anything meaningful alone. The applause grew louder. Across the table, Li Wei joined in. His smile remained steady. Only his eyes had changed. Later that evening, after dessert had been served, several younger engineers gathered around Ethan. How do you stay creative? One asked. Ethan thought for a moment. I stay curious. Curiosity lasts longer than inspiration. Another engineer asked. What's the first thing you do when an idea fails? He smiled. I ask why it deserved to fail. The group laughed. He continued. Failure isn't punishment. It's information. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. No one noticed Li Wei quietly excuse himself from the table. Outside, snowflakes drifted gently across the empty courtyard. Li Wei stood alone beneath the covered walkway overlooking the frozen lake. The silence felt welcome. His phone vibrated. A message from an old university friend. Saw another interview with your American partner. Congratulations. He seems like the face of the company now. Li Wei read it once, then deleted it. The words remained anyway. He stared across the frozen water. The reflection looking back from the dark surface seemed unfamiliar. He whispered almost without realizing it. I built this company. The winter wind carried the words away. No one answered. Inside the restaurant, Ethan stepped outside looking for fresh air. He found Li Wei standing alone. Mind if I join you? Li Wei nodded. For several minutes, neither man spoke. Snow settled quietly on the wooden railing. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. My father always said success is strange. Li Wei glanced toward him. How? The more successful you become, the more people assume the journey was easy. Li Wei smiled faintly. My father used to say something similar. What? He said. People only notice the mountain after someone reaches the top. Ethan laughed softly. Our fathers would have gotten along. They probably would have. It was a warm conversation. A genuine one. For a brief moment, the friendship returned. Hidden beneath comparison. Still alive. Still possible. Had either man chosen differently, perhaps the story would have ended there. But life rarely changes because of one conversation. It changes because of what people choose to believe afterward. The following morning brought unexpected news. An international technology magazine published its annual list of 40 innovators changing the future of Asia. Number 11. Ethan Liang. The article praised his leadership philosophy, his collaborative approach, his technical vision, his belief that innovation should make technology feel more human. Horizon Dynamics employees crowded around computer screens reading the article. Proud, excited, inspired. Someone printed copies. Another framed the magazine cover near the engineering department. No one meant any disrespect toward Li Wei. They simply celebrated good news. Sometimes unintentional moments wound the deepest. At exactly 8:43 a.m., Li Wei walked past the framed magazine. He slowed, looked at Ethan's photograph, read the headline, then continued walking. His face remained expressionless. But inside, something quietly crossed a line. Envy no longer asked questions. It began offering answers. You deserve this. Without you, none of this exists. History remembers faces, not partners. The voice sounded convincing, because it was no longer coming from outside. It had become his own. Across the city, Lin Xiaoyu finished reviewing a patent application for another technology client. Before signing the final page, she paused. A small note her late professor had once written inside one of her textbooks slipped into view. Protect ideas carefully. Protect integrity even more carefully. She smiled, folded the note, returned it to the book. Some lessons never stopped arriving exactly when they were needed. She simply didn't yet know. They were about to become the center of her own life. Thread lesson. Jealousy rarely begins with hatred. It begins with gratitude that slowly forgets itself. Asterisk the moment we believe another person's recognition has stolen our own. We stop seeing partners and begin seeing rivals. Chapter 11. The longest shadow. There is an illusion that accompanies success. It convinces us that the greatest dangers arrive from competitors across the street, from rival companies, from changing markets, from economic downturns. But history has whispered the same lesson for thousands of years. The greatest threat to almost every kingdom, almost every family, almost every partnership, rarely comes from outside the walls. It begins inside them. Quietly, patiently, one compromise at a time. By the middle of December, Beijing glittered beneath millions of winter lights. Though Christmas was not a traditional Chinese holiday, shopping districts embraced the season with dazzling displays. Glass storefronts reflected illuminated trees wrapped in silver lights. Luxury malls echoed with orchestral music. Street vendors sold roasted chestnuts beside cafes decorated with red ribbons and evergreen wreaths. The city borrowed celebrations without surrendering its own identity. It had always known how to make something foreign feel uniquely Chinese. Ethan admired that. He wondered if people could learn to do the same. Horizon Dynamics had entered its busiest season. Every department worked toward one objective: a global technology summit in Shanghai. The company had been selected to unveil the newest evolution of its platform before government officials, investors, multinational corporations, and media from around the world. Months of preparation depended upon one presentation, one demonstration, one opportunity. The pressure energized Ethan. He loved deadlines, not because they created stress, because they forced clarity. His office whiteboard had become a landscape of arrows, diagrams, timelines, and handwritten notes. Engineers wandered in throughout the day. No appointments. No hierarchy. Just conversations. What if we simplified this screen? What happens if the network fails? Can the system recover automatically? Every suggestion mattered. Every voice counted. The best idea won. Not the highest title. That philosophy had transformed Horizon Dynamics into more than a company. It had become a community of creators. Employees stayed late not because they were expected to, because they believed the work mattered. From the hallway, Li Wei watched through the glass walls. Laughter. Debate. Whiteboards filled with ideas. People interrupting one another without fear. He remembered when employees had once gathered around him that way. Not because Ethan had taken anything. Because leadership, like gravity, naturally pulls people toward those who make them feel seen. It was never something Ethan tried to do, which somehow made it even harder to compete against. That afternoon, the executive team reviewed confidential documents related to the Shanghai presentation. Technical architecture. Future product roadmap. Patent filings still awaiting approval. Projected acquisitions. Everything that represented Horizon Dynamics' future. Li Wei closed the conference room doors himself. No copies leave this room. Everyone agreed. The documents remained on the polished table until evening. When the meeting ended, Ethan carefully gathered every folder, every page, every handwritten note. His father had taught him something long ago while closing the family restaurant each night. Respect your work enough to protect it. It had become habit, not paranoia. Discipline. Later that evening, Ethan remained alone in the office. Outside, snow drifted lazily between skyscrapers. Most employees had gone home hours earlier. The engineering floor had fallen silent. Only the soft hum of servers filled the darkness. He walked slowly between rows of empty desks. Each workstation told a story. Family photographs. Small potted plants. Sticky notes filled with reminders. Children's drawings taped beside computer monitors. These weren't simply employees. They were people trusting one another with a shared dream. He smiled. Sometimes companies forgot that. He hoped Horizon never would. Several floors above him, Li Wei unlocked his office. Not because he had forgotten something. Because sleep had become increasingly difficult. He poured himself a cup of tea, walked toward the windows. The city stretched endlessly beneath him. A sea of lights. Millions of strangers. Millions of private lives. His eyes drifted toward Ethan's office below. The lights were still on. Working again. Always working. Li Wei remembered something one investor had once said. Vision is rare. He had dismissed the comment at the time. Now, it replayed constantly. Vision. Leadership. Innovation. The words all seemed attached to another man's name. His phone rang. It was his younger sister. He almost ignored it. Instead, he answered. You sound tired. I've been busy. No. She paused. You sound unhappy. Li Wei walked silently across the office. I'm fine. You've always lied the same way. He smiled despite himself. What do you mean? You become quieter. She waited. What's really happening? For the first time in weeks, he considered telling someone the truth. That he felt invisible inside the company he had helped build. That every compliment directed toward Ethan somehow echoed louder than his own achievements. That he no longer recognized the thoughts keeping him awake at night. Instead, he chose the easier answer. Just work. His sister sighed softly. I hope that's all it is. So did he. Across Beijing, Lin Xiaoyu attended a lecture given by a retired judge. The auditorium was nearly full. The judge no longer spoke about famous cases. He spoke about character. Near the end of the evening, a student asked, what causes intelligent people to make terrible decisions? The old judge smiled sadly. They don't wake up intending to become dishonest. They simply begin telling themselves that one exception is justified. He folded his notes. Integrity doesn't disappear in one moment. It erodes. Like stone beneath running water. Lin wrote the sentence carefully inside her notebook. She underlined it twice. Near midnight, Ethan finally shut down his computer. Before leaving, he stood once more beside the panoramic windows overlooking Beijing. Snow continued falling. The city looked peaceful, untouched. He thought about his parents closing the restaurant in California, about Li Wei preparing for Shanghai, about the engineers who believed in the platform, about the responsibility that came with leading something larger than himself. He whispered quietly into the empty office. We're almost there. He wasn't speaking to investors, or markets, or shareholders. He was speaking to everyone whose work had made the dream possible. Then he switched off the lights. The office disappeared into darkness. He never noticed another figure standing several floors above, watching him leave. Not with anger. Not yet. With something colder. Calculation. The distance between jealousy and betrayal is rarely measured in months. It is measured in the moment someone stops asking, "Why do they deserve it?" and begins asking, "How can I make it mine?" That question had not yet been answered. But for the first time, it had finally been asked. Thread lesson. No betrayal begins with an action. It begins with a story we quietly tell ourselves until the impossible starts feeling justified. Guard your character long before you need to guard your reputation. Chapter 12. The City That Was Listening. There is an hour that belongs only to great cities. Just before dawn. When office towers still glow from those who never went home. When delivery trucks share empty streets with the first buses of the morning. When yesterday has not completely disappeared. And tomorrow has not yet fully arrived. Beijing wore that hour with quiet dignity. The third ring road hummed softly beneath a blanket of winter mist. Temple roofs collected the season's first frost while glass skyscrapers reflected a pale ribbon of light growing along the eastern horizon. For a brief moment, ancient stone, modern steel, memory, ambition, all stood together beneath the same sky. The city seemed to whisper only one lesson. Everything changes. Inside Horizon Dynamics, preparations for the Shanghai Global Technology Summit had reached their final stage. Engineers tested every server. Designers reviewed every presentation. Translators polished every sentence. Lawyers examined every clause. Even the reception staff rehearsed welcoming international delegates. It felt less like preparing for a conference, and more like preparing a ship before crossing an ocean. No detail seemed too small, because everyone understood something important. People rarely judged excellence by extraordinary moments. They judged it by ordinary ones. Ethan arrived before sunrise. He always preferred the building when it was quiet. No ringing phones. No conversations. Only possibility. He carried 2 cups of coffee. One for himself. One for whoever happened to arrive next. Small habits. His father used to prepare tea for every employee before opening the restaurant. When people know they're appreciated, he would say, they protect the place as if it belongs to them. Ethan had never forgotten. The first person through the door was Machen. She looked surprised. You remembered. Ethan handed her the second cup. You've been sleeping 4 hours a night. She laughed. 5. I stand corrected. She accepted the coffee. Thank you. It isn't much. It isn't the coffee. She smiled warmly. It's that you noticed. She disappeared toward the engineering floor, carrying far more than caffeine. She carried the feeling that her work mattered. Leadership often looked like that, almost invisible, until years later. From the mezzanine above, Li Wei watched the exchange. No applause. No speeches. Just one ordinary act of kindness. Yet employees remembered these moments. Not because they were expensive. Because they were genuine. Li Wei found himself wondering, when had he last done something thoughtful without first thinking about the company? He couldn't remember. The realization unsettled him. Later that morning, Horizon welcomed several prospective international partners. Representatives from Japan, Singapore, Germany, Canada. The conversations moved easily between English and Mandarin. Ideas crossed languages with surprising grace. One German executive studied the engineering team before quietly remarking, "You've built something unusual." Li Wei smiled. "We've built good software." The executive shook his head. "No. I've seen good software. What you've built." He glanced toward Ethan as he answered a junior developer's question. "Is a culture." The words hung in the air. No one responded immediately, because everyone understood they had just received a compliment far greater than any product review. That afternoon, Ethan received an email from California. The subject line simply read, "Photos." His mother had attached pictures from the family restaurant. His father standing behind the counter. Regular customers smiling into the camera. The old neon sign glowing above the entrance. Nothing extraordinary. Just home. His mother had written only one sentence beneath the final photograph. Your father still tells everyone you're only in Beijing for a little while. Ethan laughed quietly. Some parents never stopped believing their children would eventually come back. He closed the laptop gently. Not because he was homesick. Because he suddenly understood something. You could love more than one place without betraying either. Across Beijing, Lin Xiaoyu left court earlier than expected. Instead of returning directly to the office, she wandered through a small independent bookstore. She wasn't searching for anything in particular. Some people browse stores. She browsed ideas. Near the philosophy section, she found a handwritten recommendation card tucked beneath a book. It read, "The strongest structures collapse from hidden fractures, not visible storms." No author's name. No explanation. She smiled, bought the book, and walked back into the cold afternoon carrying another lesson she didn't yet know she would need. As evening settled across the capital, Horizon Dynamics hosted one final rehearsal before departing for Shanghai. The presentation unfolded flawlessly. Every transition, every demonstration, every contingency plan. When the final slide faded from the screen, spontaneous applause filled the room. The chairman stood. I've never felt more confident. He looked toward Li Wei. You assembled an extraordinary company. Then he looked toward Ethan. And you've helped shape an extraordinary future. 2 different compliments. Both sincere. Both deserved. Yet human hearts rarely measure words objectively. They weigh them against their deepest fears. Li Wei applauded with everyone else. But inside, a dangerous arithmetic had begun. His future. My company. His vision. My years of work. He no longer saw shared success. He saw subtraction. After everyone left, Ethan lingered in the empty conference room. The city sparkled beyond the glass. He placed both hands on the polished table. The same table where he and Li Wei had first shaken hands. He smiled. We're going to do something special. He believed it completely. The room offered only silence in return. Several minutes later, Li Wei entered after Ethan had gone. He stood in exactly the same place. His hand rested on exactly the same polished surface. He looked at the empty chair where Ethan had been sitting. Then slowly opened the confidential folder prepared for the Shanghai summit. Inside were product roadmaps, prototype specifications, patent schedules, strategic expansion plans, the future. He closed the folder. His fingers remained on the cover. For the first time, he didn't see documents. He saw opportunity. Not the opportunity to build, the opportunity to possess. He quietly turned off the conference room lights. Darkness swallowed the room. Outside, Beijing continued glowing beneath a sky filled with stars hidden behind winter clouds. The city had watched empires rise. It had watched dynasties fall. It had watched friendships survive impossible odds. And it had watched others collapse beneath the weight of a single choice. The city was still watching. Because cities remember. Even when people wish they could forget. End of episode 1. Closing reflection. Every betrayal begins long before the first lie is spoken. It begins when gratitude quietly surrenders its place to entitlement. When partnership becomes comparison. When admiration becomes possession. The tragedy is not that trust can be broken. The tragedy is that, until the very moment it breaks, the person who trusts rarely sees the fracture beneath their feet. Gold Thread Studios. Every city remembers. Every choice leaves a mark. And somewhere between ambition and belonging, another golden thread is woven. Until next time, Follow the thread.